A path for emerging market resilience. It is my honor to invite to the stage our esteemed panelists. Mr. Fernando Haddad, Minister of Finance of the Federal Republic of Brazil. Her Excellency Dr. Rani Al-Mashat, Minister of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation of the Arab Republic of Egypt. His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Aurangzeb, Federal Minister for Finance and Revenue of the Government of Pakistan. His Excellency Mr. Mehmet Şimşek, Minister of Treasury and Finance of the Republic of Turkey. Moderated by Her Excellency Dr. Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund.
And a very good morning to everybody in the audience. I am very fortunate to be moderating this particular panel for two reasons. One is the topic. I have been advocating focus on resilience for many years, and especially since I became Managing Director of the IMF, because of the increased frequency and intensity of shocks and the importance for economies to build capacity to anticipate shocks and also to absorb the impact of these shocks. And the second reason I'm very fortunate is because of my panel, and I would ask the audience, give them an encouragement in advance, a round of applause, so they know we expect a lot from them. We have heard over these sessions quite a lot about the story of emerging markets in this context of talking about resilience. And the story is emerging markets in their vast majority over the last decades have built sound macroeconomic foundation. They have advanced institutional development, and as a result, they have demonstrated remarkable resilience to the shocks of the last years. There is a lot policymakers in emerging markets can be proud of. But emerging markets also face a much more complex environment. As I said in my opening, no more trade is the engine of economic growth, and that has been very valuable for emerging markets over the last decades. Exogenous shocks, in other words, things that you do not have under your control, are more frequent, and the aspirations of your people for better lives are unstoppable. You look at your fiscal space, how can you meet these aspirations, and how can you protect businesses and households from the turbulence in the world? I am going to pose that kind of questions in two groups. First, short-term challenges. We know that when you go back to your offices tomorrow, there would be a pile of issues on your desk to address. I want to first ask Minister Şimşek. You mentioned that you talked about that a few months ago. Government priority is price stability and restoring fiscal discipline. is not only Turkey that meets these challenges, that faces these challenges. In the current, more uncertain global environment, how can you do it? How can you achieve those two priorities of price stability and fiscal discipline?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'm also delighted to be in such a beautiful setting, and I'm very grateful to, Brother Muhammad Jadan and Kristalina, to you for putting together such a great conference and inviting us. We've learned a lot. Regarding challenges to some of our key priorities, I would say that challenges when it comes to disinflation and restoring fiscal health is largely domestic. Inflation is coming down. It's still high, but it's coming down. And service prices tend to be very sticky. This is not unique to Turkey, but we have seen this in particular in rents, in education. There's a lot of backward indexation. That's number one. Number two, volatile food prices tend to complicate things. And finally, inflation expectations are improving, but it's been sluggish, in particular among households and among corporates, while markets obviously tend to have a better reading of what we are saying. So going forward, I think there is no substitute to better policies, as you've highlighted. The key is sound policies and good execution of those policies. So for this year, it's a combination of tight monetary policy and tighter fiscal policy this year, combined with more supportive incomes policy. So we think that this inflation will be sustained, and that's key to further improvement in expectations. When it comes to fiscal adjustment, I have to admit earthquake has been a big drag.
Yeah.
We've spent about $74 billion over the past 2 years, which is equivalent of just over 6% of GDP on earthquake reconstruction, because we are building cities from scratch. So it's really not easy. It's not just housing. Currently 450,000 units are under construction. It's the whole infrastructure. So last couple of years, fiscal deficit to GDP has been around 5%, which is relatively high by Turkish standards. This year we aim to bring it down to about 3%. So fiscal adjustment is underway, and this is key. This is not about debt sustainability, for your information.
Yep.
Turkey's gross debt to GDP ratio, public debt to GDP ratio, is about 25%. So this is more about extending a helping hand to the central bank to bring inflation down,
Yes.
to achieve price stability. Now, globally, of course, there are complicating factors, but I think I took a fair bit of time. It's largely domestic, and the delivery is there. It's just a matter of time.
It is a great point to make that you keep your house in order, you're better off in a more uncertain global environment. And I want to recognize that since you came into office, there has been a lot more calm when it comes down to markets in Turkey. You mentioned that for you, it is not a matter of debt sustainability. Your debt level is very low. Your neighbor, Minister Aurangzeb, the Minister of Finance of Pakistan, cannot say that, because for Pakistan, that is a significant burden. And you have to deal with it, as you said, by having to face a twin deficit in the current account and deficit in the fiscal account. So how can you overcome that twin deficit? How can you address the pressure of debt? What do you see relevant for others from your experience?
So I would also like to start, Managing Director, in thanking you and Minister Al-Jadaan for the kind invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. As you rightly point out, the bane of our country has been the twin deficits, and both on the fiscal side and the current account side. On the fiscal side of things, we have now achieved a primary surplus, and this is what we've been talking about over the last day and a half. You know, prudent fiscal management. So mobilizing the local resources, our tax to GDP ratio has been languishing between 9 to 10%. It sort of moved in the direction of 10.8% end of December. Managing Director, as you know, we have agreed to move it to 13.5% to Joint Committee of Nations and to bring a certain level of sustainability to the primary surplus that we have. On the other side, it's also discussion on the expenditures and making tough policy choices with respect to what is a good cost and bad cost. That's what I also heard over the last day and a half as well. So now it's sort of moving it towards sustainability, taxation, energy reform, and SOE reform, public finance. All of these come into the picture onto the fiscal side of things. On the current account side, obviously remittances and export. And we are very clear that on the export side, if we have to grow sustainably, it has to be export-led growth. And we have to fundamentally change the DNA of the economy, and we are working towards that. As a result of all of this, overall debt to GDP, which was north of 73%, has now come into mid-60s. And Managing Director, we just need to make sure that we make it sustainable as we go forward.
This is indeed the right trajectory, the right direction to travel. And I want to thank you for your dedication to stay the course. And for the audience, I can share with you a small secret. The minister likes his job despite all of the difficulties he faces. And I think some of the topics you touched upon for Pakistan, like privatization, dealing with the SOEs reforms, improving the overall performance of the economy, they are also challenges that Egypt faces. And I would turn to Minister Al-Mashat. I was very impressed to listen to your comments about Egypt's determination to bring forward these reforms when you were in Davos. And you explicitly talked about growth being a precondition for resilience. Can you tell us a bit more how Egypt thinks about a resilient economy for that more shock-prone world of ours?
Well, thank you very much, Managing Director, and I also want to thank Minister of Finance, Minister Gadaan, for hosting us here. We've learned so much from the interactions, and I look forward to coming next year again. Investing in resilience is an investment in the future, and if I want to dissect that into two fronts. There are first principles that we all agree on, which is macroeconomic stability. This is a necessary condition if we want to move forward on privatization, if we want to move forward on confidence and credibility internally and externally. So when we talk about the inflation, debt dynamics, when we talk about a prudent fiscal policy, all of these are necessary conditions to be able to go to the next step, which is to provide convincing structural reforms that again push the potential of the economy. When we take a look, in our case, we have done in March of last year very important policy reforms that have been able to bring back macroeconomic stability, particularly in the foreign exchange market. When we take a look at the fiscal targets, which have also been achieved, and most importantly, efficient resource allocation when it comes to subsidy reform. So these have been important ingredients that pave the way for, and another element has been efficient public investment. So there has been a retrenchment in public investment, and that has been reflected in GDP numbers right after March. You can see the manufacturing non-oil sector moving forward. We can see more exports taking place once the intermediate inputs into production were actually pushed. And also on the expenditure side, we see a resumption of private investments coming in. So there has been this combination of positive outcomes from the very stringent macroeconomic policies that have been, and of course inflation has been coming down as well. So this is what I would call first principles. All of us macroeconomists, whether you're in Minister of Finance, central bank governor, working on development so that you are able to achieve this tranquil environment in order to move ahead with respect to development objectives and aspirations. As you mentioned, people are at the core of what governments want to do with respect to maintaining macroeconomic stability and then pushing structural reforms to bring in private investments. So this is maybe the context of what many emerging markets need to do. Reform is a continuous process. We can never claim linearity today, because problems are becoming complex and the answers are also becoming complex, but you are rewarded when you are able to tackle complex situations in a positive way.
I saw your neighbor nodding when you talked about subsidy removal. This is really tough and a necessity that without it we can't really get our economies in good shape. So bon courage. Our next speaker, Minister Haddad, will speak in the beautiful language of his country. So please get ready, put your earphones. Minister Haddad, I want to start by thanking you for all you have done for the G20 presidency to bring the world together in a turbulent time. I want to ask you, how did the outcome of the G20 in terms of more focus on inclusive reforms, how does that impact your thinking? In Brazil, we know that there has been a bit of spike of inflation that leads the central bank, and rightly so, to tighten a bit. On the other side, on the fiscal side, you put forward a very comprehensive package of reforms. How do you see implementing these reforms, and how do you see bringing the public on board for them, the social support without which it is hard to get reforms implemented?
Queria, antes de mais nada, agradecer ao FMI e agradecer ao governo saudita pela hospitalidade e estamos aqui tão bem acolhidos nessa extraordinária cidade de AlUla. Bom, o Brasil tem feito um trabalho tentando encontrar um caminho de equilíbrio e sustentabilidade, mesmo em face de um ajuste importante. O Brasil
left an inflation of 2 digits 3 years ago. Today, NAS have an inflation between 4 and 5%, which is an inflation for Brazil that is relatively within normality. since the real's been implemented 26 years ago, around 12, 13 years, the inflation's been below 5%. What's happening in this moment? But with the devaluing and strengthening of the dollar in the world, it ended up making us to do this problem with inflation in the second semester of last year. This is why the central bank intervened to guarantee the inflation rate would be back to bearable rates. We are growing in the last 2 years around 3.4% a year, contradicting all of the predictions, both domestic and international. Brazil has a commercial around $85 billion a year, with an influx of commerce around $600 billion between import and exports. We have the lower unemployment rate in our history. We did a tax reform that is the broader ever done in the country to help the investments and exports and make it more progressive from the point of view to serve the poorer population that won't pay taxes over consumption from 2027. And we understand that the fiscal adjustment that we're doing is not recessive, because we're guaranteeing a growth rate of 3.4% around a declining inflation, even having to increase the interest rate at this moment to converge to the inflation rates target that was established by the monetary institution, and the elevated increase in rates will be in the short term. Dollar is back to proper levels. It fell 10% in the last 60 days, the dollar in Brazil, and I think that this is going to make that inflation will be stable. One very important thing to highlight, that fiscal adjustment is not done on the working people. We are recomposing the fiscal income from Brazil that were eroded in the last 10 years. So only for you to have an idea, our PIB grew 3.5% and the income grew 10% in real terms. We are maintaining the fiscal balance and tackling the fiscal states that did not help Brazil. Talking about G20, we are defending, as we did, is a reglobalization, but a sustainable one that is not presided by the market interests, but also by the interests in tackling the regional inequalities and distribute economical opportunities geographically. So Brazil defends thinking that we have to rethink a social and environmental sustainable reglobalization, something that got leverage these days. We have to take it with very careful. It's not going to reproduce more democracy, more freedom. We need to be careful with the movements that are being done around the world, so the extremism is not stronger. And this is only going to be possible if we start going back and thinking about economic and social economic integration of the international relations.
Thank you, and we have a...
Nós temos uma reação daquilo que...
Just a quick one, Managing Director, that not only just hearing my worthy counterparts here, but over the last day and a half, you know, while all of us might have specific...
لماذا كلنا نواجه هذه الهشاشة ولكن ما سمعته وتعلمته خلال
markets and developing economies in general, we are actually in a relatively good place. We have entered 2025 on a relatively strong note in terms of macro stability, in terms of resiliency of the banking system, and the bold and structural reforms which a number of economies are undertaking at this point in time. And therefore, a lot is in our control in terms of staying the course. And I loved it when President Jin said, keep the caravan moving. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
I very much agree that over the last sessions during the formal and informal engagements, two messages came through very clearly. The first one is that emerging markets recognize they first and foremost rely on themselves, on their ability to build strong economies with good policies. And second, that they also see opportunities for interactions, engagements, cooperation, for new flows of goods and services that can compensate for some of the loss of economic integration. And another theme that we heard, and we heard it in the previous session, is that for emerging markets to succeed, they have to be smart about the role of governments. The governments are there for the policies that are necessary to provide predictability to businesses, but not there to do what businesses can do better than them. And that notion of smart deregulation is something that also came true. I heard from Minister Haddad mention about the strong dollar. And I want to turn to Minister Shemshet again and ask you this. The dollar has been quite strong for quite some time. Interest rates in the United States have been quite high for quite some time. How do you see this looking forward, and what does it mean for Turkey to operate in an environment of stronger dollar, high interest rates in the United States? Is that the new normal, or we should be prepared, and we heard that from Minister Haddad, for shifts? And how do we build resilience in terms of facing those potential shifts?
Well, both strong dollar and high long-term yields, U.S. Treasury bond yields, are negative for emerging markets. And we've had a good discussion yesterday about, I think it was Governor Karahan who mentioned that there was a compelling case for the neutral rate to go up or to stay up. And also dollar strength, further dollar strength. We don't know, but maybe on the cards, in the cards. So these are challenging for emerging markets. Turkey is not immune to these trends. The only thing I would say that, first of all, we may be proven to be more resilient this time around, simply because we're not a crowded trade. For quite a while, as far as portfolio inflows are concerned, Turkey was not really on investors' radar screen. So there's been a comeback, but we're not yet a crowded trade. More importantly, last year we managed to reduce current account deficit substantially to about 0.7% of GDP. So while it may widen this year a bit, it's highly likely to be manageable. We've also built buffers. Over the past 18 months, net reserves of the central bank, has improved in tune of about 125, 130 billion US dollars. So the reduction in external deficit, combined with, as I said, additional buffers, And the fact that we're not a crowded trade may help. While going forward, I think the focus is going to be to reduce reliance on volatile inflows of capital, to see if we could improve investment climate. I mean, Turkey is a sizable market. I mean, you're talking about roughly, including Syrian refugees, you're talking about nearly 90 million people, per capita GDP of about $15,000, $1.3 trillion, domestic market. It's a sizable market. So in that sense, we're hoping to begin to attract meaningful FDI again, because these are non-debt generating inflows, while at the same time, through disinflation, through additional progress on the fiscal side, to see if we could encourage portfolio investors to extend duration, to extend maturities. And in the meantime, going forward, we've decided that we will commit less of the original sin. So starting next year, we want to be a net external debt payer, as far as government is concerned, and more, borrow more domestically. So develop domestic bond market, which is already pretty sophisticated. Borrow more in lira, less in variable rates, FRNs, more in fixed coupon, and extend maturities. So really, these are some of the thinking that we have in terms of debt management strategy and dealing with some of these potential external headwinds.
Does that resonate with the rest of the panel?
Absolutely, and one of the key elements is, and I know that that's a question, how can we finance our development? And here comes less reliance on capital inflows, less reliance on debt, and trying to look at domestic resource mobilization, creating the enabling environment for FDI to come in, but also having an integrated national financing framework where you put all of this together so that you are able to lengthen maturities. And when we talk about the international financial institutions, there was a call for restructuring and looking at it in more detail, be it at the G20 and also at the UN for the Summit of the Future. And a key element there is also that concessional finance is there for the private sector to really de-risk many of these upcoming challenges with respect to yields and how it's going to affect the emergence or the return of FDI and investments into emerging markets.
I'm very glad to hear you talking about the role of international financial institutions in this context. Yes, we have to think about the buffering role we play, and if anybody on the panel has any recommendations for us at the IMF, they're most welcome. What more can we do to play that stabilizing role in this current environment? Minister Şemşet, you have known us for a long time.
Well, first of all, under your leadership, I think the fund, I have to say, in many ways is more understanding, but also it's leading some of the work in these areas. I think capital flow management is always the most difficult component. We do benefit from some of the exercises during the annual meeting, the early warning exercise. But the fact that you are now have a better understanding of each country's specific conditions, in my view, is an asset. In the past, there was this kind of like, take it or leave it. This is, this is the program approach. I think there's a sea change. That's my understanding. So we have to give you credit on that. But regarding resilience, I think identifying some of these, cross-cutting, strong trends, and making recommendations on how to handle. I know there's no one recipe that would be good for everyone, but it would certainly help. Focusing on some of these, what it means having strong dollar in terms of trade. For example, in our case, it's negative because we buy raw materials in US dollars and we sell it mostly in euro because Eurozone is our key trading partner.
Right.
Also, debt service cost.
Yep.
When dollar is strong, when reference rate is high, regardless of how low your spreads are, when the base rate, when US is borrowing at 4.5%, and you have to pay a premium over this, a spread over this. So I think focusing on, maybe it would also be a policy recommendation for some of the advanced economies to get their acts together.
Yes.
Just a very quick intervention, Managing Director. It's more in the context of medium to long term, with the MDBs now increasingly working together. As you know, in January we signed the first 10-year country partnership framework with the World Bank Group.
Yes.
Because it's what we talk about is the immediate turnaround of the economies through the structural reforms. But that framework then allows us to look at two existential issues, which is population control and climate change for Pakistan. The last thing with respect to the fund, we are very grateful for not only the funding, financing, but the technical support. And your mission was very recently in Pakistan with respect to governance, and Minister Al-Jadaan talked about governance and ownership and accountability yesterday, and getting that technical support and success transfer from other countries, etc., is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah. Minister Mashad has been a very strong voice on the responsibility of multilateral development banks, more broadly institutions, to work together. So I'm sure you have some thoughts to share on that.
I have to say that as of late, the coordination is very much clear among the MDBs, but it's also on the countries to be platforms for that interaction and for that coordination. So unless there's very clear country programs and country ownership on projects, on development issues, we cannot expect the MDBs just to be working together. So the countries themselves need to create that environment with clear commitment to reforms, with clarity with respect to the projects, and then leverage on the credibility we have with the different institutions. The other element, and climate change was mentioned. So of course there's the RSF that the IMF has rolled out to many countries, and we finalized our negotiations on that. But also country platforms have come to the forefront in discussions where mitigation and adaptation for countries that need adaptation projects are owned, but at the same time technical assistance, innovative financing such as debt swaps for climate action. We have our own country platform that we benefited from this debt swap. And then finally, and this is a statistic for 2024, our private sector, particularly in renewable energy, wind, green hydrogen, has been able to secure concessional finance more than the government. So this in itself is again a testament that coordination between MDBs and countries providing that actually opens up venues for private investment to mitigate some of the costs of FDI into countries.
And ultimately contribute to this economic and social resilience we are discussing here. In the decades before, for the IMF, the sources of shocks were primarily in the financial sector or in economic mismanagement. But now we know there could be other sources of shocks, and among them climate shocks have become, for a number of countries, ever present. You are going to be hosting the COP this year. How do you see the world advancing on understanding this element of resilience, resilience to the force of nature? I got it. Yeah, it's somewhere.
Ok? Bem, primeiro eu gostaria de reforçar a tese dos meus colegas de que o FMI tem
That the IMF is changing during the times and is changing for the better, putting a series of elements that reinforce the international cooperation, and they shed a light on subjects that were not considered previously in the relation with the member countries. One of them is the social matter that it became the central matter for the financial situation with the countries that are helped by the IMF. The ecological transformation took a leadership in the negotiations within the countries, and I must say that the work that it's been doing in the special for Brazil, it brings hope in terms of bringing new ways of financing overall for the countries, for low-income countries that are facing interest rates that are unbearable to do front for their commitments. So I believe that IMF is showing us the demonstration of a lot of maturity within the global challenges, the new global challenges that have been imposed to us. Brazil wants to gather all the good initiatives that the G20 started with the multilateral conversations that took place parallel to the central matters treated by the G20. Two of them that are very important: the integration of the markets of the carbon credits, and IMF has been a partner from Brazil since then to take COP30, the model of integration of the markets of carbon markets, to avoid that the countries can use the climate crisis to elevate the commercial barriers under the pretext to be protecting the environment, when it's not always the main objective of the country. But the other question is the payment for environment services. We have many economies, emerging economies, that spend small fortunes to maintain their tropical forests standing. So Brazil has one of the greatest tropical forests in the world with our neighbors shared. But I'm not just talking about South America, I'm talking about Africa, I'm talking about Indonesia and many other countries, over 50 countries. Not all of them have medium to high income. They have challenges to cooperate with the combat to the climate change through the remuneration of environmental services. So we take into consideration the World Bank strategy of financing of the forests that are standing. This was very well accepted until here, and we want throughout the COP, we can take this proposal to see if we can finally have a financial arrangement that will allow, from one side, have an international market of carbon credit, and on the other side, the payment for environmental services overall for countries that are low income, that are having difficulties to service their debts in virtue to the high elevated dollar and the high interest rates. So we have an important agenda. So what seems to me that it's very substantial in this discussion, that we cannot do fiscal adjustments and climate change against the social development. These have to be working together, and the orientation that President Lula, along with the international organizations and the international forums that Brazil is a part of, is that we are able to coincide an economical agenda with a socio-environmental agenda. So that it doesn't seem that it's impossible. The conciliation of these multiple interests around an agenda that will effectively demand more sustainability, fiscal, social, and environmental to the world.
We cannot finish a conversation on resilience
لا يمكننا أن نحقق الصمود المالي دون الحديث عن موضوع الذكاء الاصطناعي.
as an opportunity. And I am going to first ask Minister Aurangzeb your thoughts on that. Pakistan has stepped into implementing digital FDI initiative. It sounds like you see it as an opportunity, but I also would like to ask the panel, the rest of the panel, is AI primarily a factor to build more agility and resilience, or you see it more as a risk? Minister.
Yeah. Thank you, Managing Director. I think I would put it in three components. The last panel was obviously very educative with respect to AI. I totally agree with Dr. Teo that when we talk about transformation, it's just not technology, it's people, process, technology. And the people part is extremely important in terms of reskilling, upskilling them, so that we actually take the citizens along in this journey, also to avoid a jobless growth scenario in any given country. The second part of it is that we need to understand digital transformation, which is being accelerated through AI, is ultimately about better, cheaper, faster. That's through the client lens. That's what we are aiming for. And with respect to Pakistan, if you just again look at use cases, so whether it's agri-tech, we reckon that AI-led and inspired precision farming will lead to increase in crop yields by 15 to 20%. Similarly, in terms of digital banking, digital services powered by AI have already are beginning to help us with a sort of a 25% increase in our IT export services year on year, and has a huge potential as we go forward. Now, what we need to do is to ensure that the third largest freelancer population in the country gets the requisite resources, upskilling, reskilling, but also the digital infrastructure so that we can continue on this journey. And I would link it back into the whole discussion about productivity-led growth.
Yes.
And that's where it is going to become a huge enabler and game changer. Thank you.
So AI boosts